Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Past the Noise, the podcast where we have open forum discussions about a wide variety of topics. We look at it from different perspectives, whether it be cultural, societal, religious, spiritual aspects of it. We're going to discuss everything, no topics off limits. We're just going to have a good, well balanced, well rounded discussion. I am your co host, Elder Michael Hightower. I'm joined, as always, by Apostle T.B. Walker. Good evening, Apostle. How you doing?
Good evening, Elder. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Awesome,
So,
awesome.
so last week we talked about the Supreme Court overturning the 1973 Roe versus Wade decision, and it's kind of what that meant for society and the extent to which the government has or should have control over the things that people do in their what some people might consider their private lives. And so the conversation tonight seems to like dovetail, kind of flow into that. So tonight we're going to be talking about um, the separation of church and state. What does it mean? Is it real? I mean, how should we interact with the state or with the government? How should the government interact with the religious institutions? We're going to get into all of that tonight. But first, I want to remind everybody that, again, this is an open forum discussion. We are inviting you to call in, join in, and we want to hear your comments, your questions, your thoughts, whatever the case may be on this topic. There is a link above the comment section or in the overview tab, depending on what kind of device you're using. I will throw the link to call in into the comment section from time to time so that you can see it there. Click on the link, type in your name, and come on in and let us know what you're thinking.
Awesome, awesome.
Right. So, with regard to, separation of church and state, just a quick definition, because it's so simple, but still needs to kind of be said that the church and state in terms of the founding documents and the government documents is simply any religious organization, any religion, anywhere in the United States falls under church. And then the state, of course, would be the government. And so, like everything else, in the founding documents, in the Constitution, there's a little bit of vagueness there. And so this issue has been debated since, the ratification of the Constitution and will continue to be. But I think it's a good conversation to have because over time, what people may see as the church or the state may change. And you may think the relationship between the church and state has or should change. And so we want to get into all that tonight. All right, so let's start, Apostle, with the clip, really sort of discussing separation of church and state.
Got you, got you.
The reason we had so many overreaching regulations in our nation is because the church complied. The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
So, yeah. So, I mean, I would describe Representative Bobart as right, so right wing, a politician. And what's interesting, in that clip, she's actually in a church. She's actually behind a real church, and she's an elected state official. We're going to get into all that. But some of the things that she said are actually, she's correct. It's the separation of church and state is not in the Constitution.
Right.
And so the idea behind that came from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Baptist Association while he was president, sort of assuring them that the government was not going to interfere with their religion, wasn't going to interfere with the things they were doing. So I'd like to get your thoughts on what the representative had to say about the separation of church and state.
Well, I mean, listen, this is a real interesting subject and a hot button subject, especially, for a person who's a Christian, as a pastor myself. I've always believed in a separation of church and state for a variety of reasons. And taking a look at what she said in terms of the church is supposed to run the government. I don't think there's no biblical basis for the church running the government. The idea, I think is implied. The idea of the separation of church and state, though you're right, it's not it's specifically said in the Constitution, it really does imply an idea that I think a lot of people misinterpret. And one of the things that we kind of think is that, this is a Christian country, and the idea that this is a Christian country, it's designed to make sure that Christian values are, exposed everywhere in our society. But the truth of the matter is, when you really look at the Constitution, and I think that Representative Bogart has it wrong, is that they were, the founding fathers were actually advocating for freedom of religion and not exclusivity of Christianity. And I think that the idea was that they were afraid of that very same idea, that the church would get into the business of running the government, in the same way that the church also ought to be fearful of the government being in the position of running the church. So I think she's off base. And I think that you're right. There's this right-wing idea that's in our society right now. It's dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, so you're right. So her answer was sort of, or her statement was sort of in two parts. The first part is this in the Constitution? The second part is, as a result of that, how should we behave? So there's this is what it is, and then there's how should we behave. I do disagree with her about how we should behave. The danger in that, especially in a country in which we have so many different religions. Okay, which religion runs it? Do we vote based on, do you vote for the Christian way or the Muslim way or the Buddhist way? Is that what you want in a democracy? Is that what they intended? So I don't think that's what they intended. I think they intended to protect the state from the church and the church from the state. Because absolutely. Remember that a lot of things that are in the Constitution were things they were afraid of happening. I mean, they came from a country, or they knew of a country. The Church of England is the state church. So the state church had a lot of power. They were trying to avoid that. They were trying to avoid sort of this commingling of church officials and state officials deciding what's best for the people, and sort of wanting the government and the church to be separate, not impinge on each other's authority. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
And they I think the founding fathers recognized the power of both entities, and that, the world didn't start in 1791. The world didn't, they recognized, they had seen the power of the church in England. I mean, not only in England, but in all of Europe, and how it operated in the world, forming governments, making decisions about governments, and starting this new experiment called democracy. I think that they were really, really afraid of both of the entities coming together and creating a monster. And I think that's exactly what, and it's only because of the lanes. The idea, we can't have a theology. There's no way that, God will run the country in America, in the land of Jim Crow. In America, we're saying God's really running this with all that we have going on. So the idea of a theology, it can't happen unless this is the new Israel. And America is not the new Israel, where God said, listen, I gave Israel the torch, and now I'm passing it to those in Iowa. No way. It's not happening.
What's interesting about that is that some, if not most, of the colonies did have an official religion. So they sort of grafted that on, even though that's not what, they were, like you said, they were definitely afraid of a concentration of power in either the church or the state that would infringe on people's rights. So I think overall that they wanted a separation of some kind there, so that you wouldn't go back and forth between the two and have sort of this this dangerous system where one is co-opted by the other. I mean, if you think about it, the more that the church people get involved in the government, they become government. They become the government.
Sure.
The government. So you have this dynamic where there's no space, so there's no separation. So they're not able to be an agent of change or anything, because I'm right there with you. I can't tell you what this is.
That's right.
Because they're right there with you. So yeah, so I totally agree with that. But I do want to talk about sort of what is the responsibility of the church or the state to each other. So let's take a look at another clip.
Okay.
And see what we got here.
I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate would tell the president, should he be Catholic, how to act, and no Protestant minister would tell his parishioners for whom to vote.
The church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. It must be the guide and the critic of the state, and never its tool. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it will become an irrelevant social club, without moral or spiritual authority.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, both of those thoughts were articulated about the same time. Early 1960s, Kennedy was running for president, and so it's interesting how when you have sort of this commingling, if you will, people act based on their own agenda or ambition or whatever their particular perspective is. In this case, as a Catholic, there's never been a Catholic president. So as a Catholic running for president, Kennedy was very concerned that people would think, well, if I'm president, then the Catholic Church will run me, but they will determine my thinking and my decision-making progress. So what he said is absolute. He may or may not have believed that. He's saying, as president, I will act as if it's absolute. That's what he was telling people.
Right.
Maybe he did. Maybe, I mean, he did to a large extent. But I think his point was that I'm not going to. I'm trying to communicate to you that you don't have to be afraid of the fact that I'm Catholic, and if I'm president, it's not going to impinge on your rights. King had a different, although similar approach, which was that there's got to be space between the church and state, but that the church should never be in a position where we can't tell the state, no, that's wrong, or that's that's unjust, or that's needs to be changed. What do you think about that?
I think it's true. I think both of them have. I think both of them, got it right. There is a complete separation of church and state, and that complete separation never hinders the First Amendment, right? It never hinders freedom of speech. Yeah. So what the church is going to do and what it's supposed to do as it pertains to its congregants, as it pertains to society, has always been there, because that's just covered under freedom of speech. I think that the overarching idea here of the separation of church and state was really never about necessarily the positions, that the church takes as it pertains to the state, or the state takes to the church, as opposed to this really overarching idea that really wasn't there, which was freedom of religion. Mm-hmm. I think that, what gets missed is that this is a kind of a how's the church operate with the government argument, and it misses the idea that it's really revolutionary in, you talking about the 18th century, which was, I want you to have the right to worship however you see fit, without the government without any authoritative body hindering that. Now, we kind of look at it as Christian because, the majority of the country, leans in that direction. But I think the real revolutionary idea was that this idea of freedom. And I think that, for Christians, freedom is necessary for us to do our evangelism work, because our faith requires people to be able to choose. So the idea, as we discussed Roe versus Wade, in that there was a problem in legislating morality, I think we have the equal problem in trying to legislate religion, whatever religion that is. And because we're such a melting pot, this idea of, I don't know that I want the church the idea of church being all religions. I don't know that I want all religions involved in government. We don't have enough people, with the representatives and the senators that we have that can get together without discussing religion. They can't handle politics. So, I mean, man, you add religion and politics, that's going to be a hard Thanksgiving dinner. So I think they need to be out. I think they definitely need to be out, but I think we need to not make sure that we don't miss this idea of real freedom here that was designed by the founding fathers. I don't necessarily agree with all that's there in the Constitution, but I definitely can see the idea that they had, that this idea of equal space and without the government impinging and intruding upon a person's personal beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, again, the Constitution is intentionally vague in some areas, but it doesn't say separate a church and state, but it's definitely implied. I mean, they said the state cannot create a religion, and the state cannot tell religion how to operate. I mean, that's pretty clear, even though, and
it can't favor any religion, right? It can't favor one religion over another.
No, absolutely cannot. No, because then you have something different. Now you have a theocracy. You have a situation where that particular religion or church is running the state. They're and then your putting all the other religions in a place where they're going to be your opponents no matter what.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
But that does, I mean, it does bring up an interesting point about, I mean, we live in a country that has laws and regulations and rules with regard to any number of things. And in some ways, the relationship or the connection between the church and the state is unavoidable, right? For purposes of, you register or your organization, you're a 501c3 organization. I mean, your building has to be zoned for whatever, for as a church
Sure.
or whatever. There's all sorts of state, not imposition, but there's all sorts of state rules you have to follow if you're part of the state. So let's take a quick look at this clip.
Okay.
I just want to talk about whether or not churches should untether themselves from government completely.
Sure.
If you look at what's going on in many colleges and universities, there is increasing disdain for religion. I don't like it. I don't like it. I find America to be the best country in the world in terms of not having these divisions. For example, the two countries I know best are the United States and Israel. And Israel is having a terrible problem because if you're not very religious in Israel, you're anti-religious. And the reason for that, I believe, is because the state has played too great a role in promoting religion. Separation of church and state is good for religion. So my view is, don't ask for the help of government. Don't ask for the help of the state. Do a better job. Go out there and make religion more relevant to the life of young people.
Yeah. Listen, I think he makes a huge point. The reality is that I think that most churches and most religious organizations understand the constitutionality, or at least the implied constitutionality of separation of church and state. Yet there is a handout. The idea of the 501c3 and the nonprofit status, and all those things that are given as breaks and benefits to the church. I get it on one hand, but I do think Mr. Dershowitz makes a really, really good point that if there's going to be a separation, that separation can't be in every other way other than financial, right? I think that that's a tough one because as a nonprofit organization and how churches work, I understand personally the difficulty that's there and the need even for what looks like governmental protection. But if you're going to get governmental protection, it does bring the government in to a certain extent to have some oversight, over what's said, some oversight over where you are, some oversight over, let's make sure you're not talking to your congregation and telling them this or that. And I think that, he's probably right, that as we begin to look at this and, this issue that's come up today, it's really important for us to maybe take a look and determine that maybe we do need to do a better job. And maybe it needs to be much more insular and away from some of the handouts that we might be receiving from the government, yet telling the government stay out except for the tax exemption.
Yeah, because the tax exemption comes with some restrictions, right? You can't do certain things if you get if you're getting the tax benefit. If you refuse the tax benefit, then you are free to do things that you can't otherwise do. Is that a good thing? Like if a church decides to not be a 501c3 and to become more involved in politics, is that okay with you? You think that's a good idea?
Listen, you know what? I'll be honest with you. I think that pastors and leaders of their churches are called to do a variety of different things that may be different from other congregations, right? So yeah, that would be fine with me. Here's the thing. I think that, if we look at the separation of church and state, though, I think that we go down a slippery slope. The idea that a pastor may, encourage his flock to, get involved in a particular party, for instance. Sure. Is that okay with me? Yeah, that's that pastor's leading. I don't believe in it. But if that pastor's led to go in that direction, sure. But I think that it's dangerous if the government is involved, because the government also has a hand in pushing churches in a direction, left wing, right wing, all of those things. Here are the hot button issues, and here's how you should vote on it. It's very difficult if people are going in and laying hands on a particular party leader and saying this is who you should vote for. I think that's dangerous. So yeah, I think that we should be free. Churches are free to go in whatever direction they want, but I think we've got to remove the tax exemption though in order for that to work. Or it is that social club. It does become an extension just of really extension of a particular party.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is a bit problematic. I mean, think about it, but it's. I mean, just the way that because government can be complicated, then the relationship the government has with other entities become complicated, and the financial one. I mean, if you think about it, the financial thing is a big stick. I mean, the government routinely will threaten organizations with, if you don't do this, we're going to take your status. You don't do this, we're going to take this benefit. So in a way, they are controlling what the church
better believe it
do because of the status, and that's I think in that sense he was 100% right that churches should seek to be independent of everything outside of its own congregation. Like that should be your influence. Like your influence shouldn't be someone outside telling you, well, if you don't do this, then we're going to do this, or if you do this, we're going to take this or that away from you. I think that's kind of put you sort of into a compromising situation that we.
Well, I mean, think about what Dr. King said. In order to be a critic of the government, you can't be a tool of that very same government. You can't really be a really good. You can't be a bellwether for where the government really is. You can't really be able to really gauge the temperature if you're in the pool with the same government. You won't be able to tell how hot the water really is if you're really hand in hand there. And there is a level of control. Even if there isn't a heavy-handed control, there is still a level of control over what you can say to certain extents, where you can go, how you need to form your letter. You can't say, in Jesus' name in certain cases, right? There's certain places that that churches have to compromise that they may not recognize as compromise simply because of this overarching protection. So I think that if we're going to really look at this issue in this way, and it's debated, so I don't think that it's going to happen right away, but I think that what's required is really looking at this protection that's there that may not be that much of a protection anyway. But of course, there is a financial shield there, especially as we have more mega churches and churches are, bigger and bigger. There's a huge benefit, to having those things happen. But the downside is that you open your pulpit up to, Representative Boebert and her ilk to come in because of those very same connections to politicians.
Right. And you could hear they wanted her there. They were happy she was there and manning her.
Oh, she didn't bum rush the door. Oh, yeah, she was invited. Yeah, she didn't break the door down. She was invited there.
No, she was. I mean, and she was right at home. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, she was right at home there, just sort of, giving her political viewpoint on the matter. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, that's.
Well, you remember. Listen, I mean, this isn't a show about religion, so to speak. But remember, biblically, there was a spot where I believe there was a king, Uzziah, who had gone in and was really going in and he was dealing with some things, dealing with the priest. And because of what he had done, basically church and state mingling together, he got leprosy, right? The Lord cursed that particular action. Now, again, this isn't Bible study, but I want to, to be able to show that even there are lanes that are there, that this is for the king, right? And this is political, but this is for the priest, and that can't be touched. And from a biblical perspective, the idea of separation of church and state has been there. When Israel left, the idea of God being the king, now we're moving into human government. So there's never been this meshing together. Once we operate in human government, there's never been a meshing together of the government and the priesthood. And I think that model that you see, is happening here. That there's a little leprosy happening all over the place because some people are putting their hands in areas that they aren't qualified.
Right.
They aren't qualified. We teach biblical morality, but we're not meant to legislate it.
Right. That's two different things. Yeah.
Force isn't force is just not a faith way. And we aren't supposed to be the Christian Taliban. So, the reality is that that without that separation, that's exactly what we get.
Yeah, that's true. And it's unfortunate. I am, just a quick reminder, I'm putting the call-in link into the comments. So if you want to call in, make a comment, have a question, whatever the case may be.
Oh man, I would love to hear what people have to say.
Me too. Yeah, I would love to have people chime in on this particular issue. Earlier, you mentioned whether or not America was founded as a Christian nation. Is America a Christian nation, or was it founded as such? Let's take a look at a clip, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
America was founded based on Christianity. Our DNA is Christian. Our roots are Christian. We aren't Muslim. We aren't atheist. America's the greatest country that's ever existed, and it's because of Judeo-Christian values.
The Christian right and their claims of religious liberty, they're not advocating for everybody's religious liberties. They're advocating for theirs.
This nonsense about separation of church and state has gotten way, way beyond the bounds of what the founders of our Constitution thought.
Christians are tired of being bullied for their faith in the public square.
The left, the socialists, have made it very clear that they stand against the church. Unless we bow down and accept their agenda.
America founded as a Christian nation?
America's founded as a Christian nation. I mean, when you hear, listen, I'm a Christian. I'm just unashamed. I'm a Christian, right?
Mm-hmm.
No apologies for being a Christian. But to so many of those clips, I wish I had, the world's smallest violin, so I could just, play it, and we're being bullied. And then, listen, America with a church on every corner where as Christians we're being bullied. When there was prayer in schools, it was only Christian prayer. There wasn't like well, listen, it's the Arabic hour in about an hour, and the Sikhs will be on, at 7:15. Right. It was always Christian. The idea that we're being bullied is really, really propaganda. But I think this concept that we're founded as a Christian country, I think just is hijacking in some way of real history, because there were Christians that were founding fathers, but most of them were deists. Or some of them were deists. Some of them were theists. Rationalists. They weren't all Christians, but the focus was not let's found a Christian country. It was to found a country that was allowed for freedom of religion. That was the beauty of America. That's the beauty of America now. And I think we miss that because that beauty is still here. You don't find this kind of liberty, in other areas of the world. So, I mean, that's still here. I think we've got to take a look at it and be willing to fight for that.
So how do you answer his observation that it wasn't founded by Buddhist or atheist or some other religion?
Yeah, I would say let's look at history, and there's a great deal of. There's a reason why it wasn't founded by Buddhists, because Buddhism was not even a religion that had reached Europe in that way, right? So the reality is that these were not based in the laws here. Were not based upon Judeo-Christian values. Let's look at the law. From the Bible, we'll see that there is no stoning in here that you see. There's no, circumcision that you have to have. There's lots of things that are not based upon Judeo-Christian values, right? So when you look at the founding fathers, all of them were not Christian. So the documents could not be based upon that, because they would all have to be Christians. Right. But these are all moral values, and they're not Christian values because there's a higher level even in Christianity. I think bringing Christianity down to the American level demeans being a Christian. The idea that, like, if you're a Christian, American Christianity is what makes up Christianity. Listen, that's really embarrassing and demeaning, because we have not, in America, are no way the shining example of what true Christians are supposed to be. That's found in that Bible. And so this idea that we're founded here to form a Christian nation is absolutely not true. And there's no history that backs it up.
No, and there's history that they did things in the name of religion, such as slavery and such as what they did to the Native Americans, that would have to be considered anti-Christian. So
absolutely,
problematic things about the way that they operated that clearly are not Christian and wouldn't fall under any kind of Christian banner whatsoever. So that is problematic, and from that standpoint, because you're sort of setting them up as sort of like almost like they were prophets or something, like they were, you know, clean and they were pristine, and they were just human. They were just men trying to figure out this new country and this new way of doing things, and they never. I don't think they ever put themselves up as being more than what they actually were. So it's highly problematic to me that the idea that it was a exclusively Christian nation founded by a bunch of Christians, because that's, like, to your point.
I mean, you got to admit that really makes for good TV. You know,
absolutely.
I mean, man, you don't get a better commercial than that.
No.
You know, and wave the flag behind it. But the truth of the matter is that just wasn't in the minds of the founding fathers.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is our nature here to revisit history and to revise it. And this is revisionist history. That's exactly what this is. We've been revising and playing this narrative for the longest time. And what it's done, it drives a wedge between people. And that ability, even if we're looking at it from a Christian standpoint, the ability to even evangelize and to witness and to connect is made more difficult by this idea that everyone else is a bunch of others, when this whole country was founded by people who were thought to be others.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, we have a caller.
Yes.
Let's bring her in. We have Sean Feder. Sean Feder, welcome to Pass the Noise. Sean Feder, welcome.
Sean Feder Hightower.
Hi, nice. I guess I'm a stalker because I've been listening to your podcast since you started. But the last piece of your conversation really resonated with me, because you said exactly what I was thinking. I'm trying to figure out how I can remember that line that, you know, using America as the standard of Christianity demeans Christianity. And as I was sitting here listening to the conversation, I thought to myself, the one smart thing that the founders did was to ensure that there was a separation of church and state. Given the hypocrisy behind so much of the decision making, I just finished watching the Benjamin Franklin documentary this past Sunday, and you get to see the hypocrisy that went into the founding of our country. And I'm really, really shocked but happy that they did say we will separate church and state. We will not allow one to have greater influence over the other, or any influence over the other. And I think that's critically important, to be honest. I kind of laughed as well when I saw that last clip of people feeling bullied, and yet they've been the ones bullying. So it was just really kind of interesting to see that. But I do think this is an important discussion, because so much of what we're hearing right now is they've taken the Bibles out of school, they've taken prayer out of schools, and this is why we're in the state that we're in. And I think the truth needs to be told. That's not why we're in the state that we're in. There are the same things that were issues for us when we started this country, which is immoral men seeing themselves as better than others, are the same issues that we're dealing with right now. So just wanted to share those thoughts, and thank you. This is a very interesting discussion.
Thanks for calling, Sean Feder. Can you hang on a minute?
Sure, I can.
Sure. I'm going to play another clip. I want to get your response to this clip that I'm about to play.
I do believe that there is an effort to take Christ, God, out of the public square. And our country is in trouble. We are more divided today since the Civil War. Only God can fix the problems we face as a country. And I think it goes back to prayer in school. We've not only taken God out of the prayer out of school, but we've taken God out of school, out of education. I believe Christians are being persecuted. I believe religious liberty is under attack, and we've seen that. Our country was founded as a Christian nation. But we certainly are not that today.
But it was really evangelicals, and I think their sense of victimhood after the cultural changes of the 1960s, the removal of prayer from public schools, the removal of Bible reading from public schools, the development of a more diverse nation with new immigration coming into the country.
It does beg the question: was it really religious, or was it race? Pop? Sean,
is that you?
I can answer that, and it was race. And again, if you look at, I mentioned this documentary I saw. One of the things that Benjamin Franklin says in some letters, which were quoted during this documentary, is he was very upset about the fact that Germans were coming in, that those with a swarthy complexion, and he said, and he was referring to Irish and Italian. And he says at the very end, I guess it's just that I prefer white. And so this is one of the founders of our Constitution who we revere. And yet he said, and who was a slave owner, who says, but even those whose skin is not as dark as those of the slaves, I still have issues with them too. So our country has been founded on division. And I think we need to stop this lie that there was this love and this openness and Christian values. I want to run as far as I can away from that falsehood, because that's not what Christianity is. And I don't want anybody, and I'm a Christian and I love God, I don't want anyone to think that that's what being a Christian looks like, sounds like, smells like. It is not those things. We do not operate that way. We operate in a place of love and forgiveness, and we did not see that with our founders or those that actually started this Constitution. We call it the original sin. That's what it was. That's what the problem is. It has nothing to do with prayer being taken out of school. It has to do with the mindset and the hearts of people who feel that they are superior to others who are not like them. I could go on and on, but
so what you're saying is that you don't feel sorry for Franklin Graham?
I feel no sorrow for Franklin Graham, and I think he looks like an absolute idiot sitting there making those statements.
Wow. I mean, listen, I'm with you. I think that when you look at the founding fathers, and we recognize, I mean, there's obviously going to be some problems with our past. We've got some in America. We've got a horrible past. But I mean, sure, and they weren't qualified, to espouse some of these Christian values that we know now. But again, I think the beauty here is that they weren't trying to. I think in reality, I don't know that they were trying to. I think that we have been trying to make them and fit them into a box that they clearly were not. I think that they were aware of their own fallibility. I think they were the government, right? So they were afraid of themselves. Don't let us get involved in this. Don't let us come into this. So I think in some ways, they're more honest about who they are than we are. We have now made them heroes that they never tried to make themselves out to be. I don't know. In all honesty, we get this from Benjamin Franklin because it's what he said. Not because he hid it, but because he said it. That's what he thought, right? So when you understand where these founding fathers were, we may not like them in terms of our time now, but let's be honest, they didn't try to wrap themselves in Americana in the way that we tried to wrap them. And they didn't say they wanted prayer to school. We added all of that and said, yes, and the founding fathers would have wanted us to do this too. In the Pledge of Allegiance, they would have wanted us to put their hands over the heart and pledge our allegiance only to this flag. So no, all of those things come from us trying to now revisit history and make superstars out of men.
Can I just say one other thing, because I think you make an interesting point there. I think it's also why we raise our hand and we say, can we not get revisionist history, but we want to have history as it really happened in real time. Yes. And I think that's something that I'm sort of on fire about, making sure that we really, really fight in the school system to make sure that people know the truth. And I think the other point that I wanted to make is, I think you're right about the founders and kind of who they were. These were intellectuals. And so in many cases, not necessarily, faith-based men, but they were intellectuals. So they approached this in many ways from an intellectual point of view. And I think it's why they were wise in really recognizing that there needed to be a complete separation. So that's all I had to offer. But again, really, really great points.
Thank you.
No, thanks for coming. All right. you know, when we talk about, it's ironic how we talked about revisionist history. This is the school prayer. I'm put on the screen. That's the school prayer. That was like the standard school prayer that was in every school. All the kids said it. It's kind of generic, and you would think that it's because it's generic that it would be harmless to everyone. And people give credit to the atheist, I think Madeline something O'Hare or something.
Yes.
She brought suit to have the prayer removed, but actually a year before that, a Jewish man brought suit saying that's not how we pray. So I don't want my kids praying that because we don't pray like that. And so immediately you see sort of the problem with saying any kind of prayer that's driven by the school, because then you have people saying that's not how we pray.
Right. Sure. Absolutely. Not only that, but there are people who, have multiple gods. Right.
Right.
I think, when you look at that, I mean, the whole idea of prayer in school begs the question of whose God are we talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Now, as a Christian, I've already made my choice. I believe what I believe. I know what I know. But the truth of the matter is, I don't advocate in any way excluding other people who have a right to the same school that my children attend, or that I would attend. My children aren't in school now, but grandchildren at this point. But when you look at that, I don't think that's not the way America was designed. I don't think that's the way it's supposed to work. That we exclude other people. And I think in some ways that clip that you put up was that this idea of the freedom of religion really was designed to protect Christians, but it didn't have an eye toward really anyone else. And I think that's dangerous.
No, it's a good point. Good point. So we talked about, church and state relationship and sort of how, we think they should operate. But there's other sort of relationships that you have that can be sort of complicated, complex. So let's take a look at a clip that's sort of where you see religion, the government, and then sort of employment interact.
Okay.
So let's take a look.
It was probably 2 hours before the game. They called me into the principal's office and they gave me the directive, and it says, if you pray on the football field, we will suspend you from coaching. Now I had to choose between my job and my faith. And nobody in America should have to face that kind of decision.
And yet another 6-3 decision today, once again along ideological lines, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of a Washington State public high school football coach who was fired by his district for leading prayers at the 50-yard line after games. In the majority opinion, Justice Gorsuch ruled the firing was unconstitutional because both the free exercise and free speech clauses of the First Amendment protect expressions like this. This is just one of a number of recent rulings that appear to weaken longstanding legal precedent for the separation of church and state. Just last week, the court ruled a taxpayer-funded private school tuition program in Maine cannot exclude religious schools, just the latest in this trend of allowing greater and greater state involvement in religion.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with people praying. So in this case, this is, part of this is an employment deal. Like when he signed the contract, when he agreed to coach high school, he knew you can't have formal prayer when you're in that context. And so it's interesting. He's sort of made to be, the sympathetic figure, but in fact, he's breaking the rules of his employer. I mean, if your employer says you can't do this, no one's making you work for that person, right? No one's making you work there. You don't have to be a high school football coach. You can do something else. When you want to pray at work, you can go ahead and pray at work. What do you think?
Now, you know what? I kind of look at that a little bit differently, right? Because
Okay.
I mean, we're talking about the prayer he's at the end of the game. It's at the end of the game.
Right.
Right. Now, the only issue I would have is him gathering up the team. And if he made it mandated it that, after prayer, then, after the game, we all have to come together,
Right.
as a team and pray. You may have other people who are not Christians, right?
Right.
I would have a
Absolutely.
problem with that. But I think the idea of going out to the 50-yard line and praying, and if other people want to join him, I think that is different. I think the idea that, like, I'm going to the 50-yard line, I'm going to pray. Now, if my other players want to join me, if other members of the, in the stands want to join me, I don't know that I have a problem with that, because I think the government can't mandate your religious convictions, but I don't think the government is saying your religious convictions cannot be in the public arena.
Right.
That's what my only issue there.
Right. So I would disagree in this sense. The coach is an authority figure, and so he may say it's not mandatory. But I mean, I played, team sports, high school. You did.
Right.
There's very little to such a thing that's like optional, right? The coach says he's doing something or he's gathering something. He might be sincere. Like this guy might be sincere. Like I don't care if he's going to play or not. He might be 100% sincere. But a 16, 17, 8-year-old might feel like, if I don't go, am I going to play as much? If I don't go, is he going to think less of me? I mean, there's a little bit of pressure. Because you're talking about an adult and kids, it's a little bit of pressure there, especially in the context of competitive team sports. I mean, if I go, might somebody go to do it just because I want to curry favor with the coach? So I think there's some issues in there, because when he goes to the 50-yard line, he's still the coach.
Sure.
I mean, if you go somewhere else, huh? I mean, I think that's sort of problematic.
Well, now, if he's still the coach, right? So if he decided personally to pray in his office, right? And he kept the door open, and players could come in if they wanted to come in, wouldn't his right to freedom of speech and his own right to exercise his own faith be hindered here if he couldn't say walk to the other side? Now, again, he is definitely going to be the coach, but as long as he doesn't mandate it, if he says, I always go to the end of the goal line and just thank God. Now, if other people follow him, I think we would walk a very difficult line if we came back behind that and said, okay, so you can't even exercise your own freedom of speech to, and to express your religion however you want to. I think it's that mandatory place that it's a fine line and it can be easily skirted. But I think that I think that the Supreme Court might have gotten that right. Simply because it really doesn't focus as much on the kids as much as it really focuses on, do I have a right to do it myself? And that would kind of be, you were a manager at a company. I mean, corporate America, do you have a right to pray in your office? And if other people say, hey, I saw you were in there closing your eyes and mumbling something, what was that? Can I come in and close my eyes and mumble something too with you? Not that I'm little in prayer, but I mean, in that same setting, are you forcing them at that point? Even though you are maybe an authority figure, does an authority figure lose their ability and their right to that First Amendment to a freedom of speech simply because I am the boss, simply because I'm the coach? Simply because I'm the chief of police, can I not then go out in the parking lot and pray? And if other people want to come with me, am I forcing them? Am I misusing my power there? I don't think so. Because that's not quite school in the same way, especially, and I don't know that you're a coach, but I mean, I'm not sure if you're a 24/7 coach, that even if I see you at Walmart, can I say God bless you, or are you the coach? Right. Yeah, I think I'm a little more uncomfortable with it than you are, just in the context of that. I totally get where you're coming from. I think this is really a grayish area where you sort of have church, state, employment, and then his own personal freedom. Like, does he not have the right himself to go to the 50-yard line and pray? And, in my viewpoint, again, is will that compel other people to make him feel like they have to come because he's an authority figure? Maybe, maybe not. But I'm not 100% comfortable with that. No, I understand where you're coming from, because I think the answer is, does he have a right to do it? Yeah, I think, but you're right. I think will it compel others to do it? I think yes. Can you legislate? Is it illegal because of your position? I think therein, this will make you feel a certain way. I'm not sure you can put a law there to keep people from feeling a certain way, even though the authority may not be there. That the freedom to walk away may be there, maybe not implied, but maybe very specific, that says, hey guys, nobody has to come out here with me. Your parents are right here. I'm going to let everybody know I'm going to be at the 50-yard line, but nobody has to come. I wonder if you did all of that and covered all the bases, in that position, if people came, then they are then in some ways exercising their freedom and their right to free speech. And I guess how could we say then, hey, you're probably influenced?
Yeah, I mean,
but you're right. It's a gray area, though.
I mean, there's no way to know what's in the player's head, right? And so you don't know, you can't know what they're thinking when they go to do it. The players might want it. I mean, you just don't know. It's just it is sort of, yeah, it's sort of a one of those tricky areas because you have so many different entities involved. The school has their own rules. The state might have their own rules.
Right.
The school district might have a set of rules, and so you have all these rules that, I mean, in fairness, I mean, even though I'm not 100% comfortable with it, do infringe on his right to free speech. It does do that. I mean,
right.
Basically saying, no, you can't do this. You cannot speak freely after the game in this way. You have to do another. Now you can give a long speech about the game. You can talk about the game and that's about this, but you can't pray. That is an infringement of his personal rights. There's no question about it. But I guess the question is, does he have? If you're not going to do that, then, in what context does the school have, sort of any? I guess I
don't think they have any because you can't really know about the feelings of the players.
You can't.
You really won't know whether they feel compelled or not.
Right. And so to me, he got fired. The firing probably a little. I mean, I understand he broke their rules, and you sort of have to embrace your rules. You gotta fire him. It seemed like you could have worked something else out. To your point, you could have maybe had some parent, coach, school meeting and sort of hashed it all out rather than firing him, because it seemed like he was seriously passionate about it. But I mean, again, that's sort of like a tricky. Are we infringing on their ability to deal with their own employees, to deal with the HR issues? Are we doing that when we say you can't fire them? I mean, I don't know.
No, I mean, the reality is that they were well within. I think legally they thought that they had a leg to stand on.
Yeah,
they had written rules. So I think that I don't think the firing was the problem. I think that's why we have the Supreme Court. That's why these situations come up, and that's why the court is there to really make these difficult decisions. And I think, this time, I think they made the right one. The Roe versus Wade, that one, that was a bad one. But I think this one, I think they were on point this time.
Okay. Well, I mean, a court with 9 human beings is going to, some they're going to
right.
So that's just the system that we have. We got about 6.5 minutes left. Let's finish up with the talk about how involved or how active the church should be in terms of political activism. So take a look at this clip and then we'll talk about it.
I want to see the Black church rise to the point to where we have influence within politics.
You voted, my man? This is where you can vote at.
Some of these pastors, evangelical pastors, they have departed from the faith.
This is God's nation, and nobody is going to take it away from him.
You said faith leaders in the evangelical church have departed.
Yes.
Departed how?
Well, let me rephrase that. I don't think they've departed. I don't think they were ever Christian.
This is where you can vote. I'm not selling nothing. This is where you can vote. I'm Tim Finley.
You are holding up leaders, one in particular, Donald Trump, who is the epitome of racism and privilege and a person of low moral fabric. And yet you say he's God's man. I don't think it's a hard statement to make. I think it's a truthful statement. And that is, I do not believe that they have any relationship with God.
Wow.
It's a little harsh. What do you think?
Yeah. Had a little judgment sauce on top of it.
Very judgmental. But from the perspective of, I mean, clearly he believes that in his mind the church should be extremely active in politics. The church should be. He's almost the other end of Representative Boebert, where church should be running this thing. So church should have their both hands in it, and sort of be trying to direct what's going on. I mean, just sort of saying the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, he's definitely said, and the idea that these guys who have departed from the faith, or maybe were never Christians in the first place, may be a little rough, and I think it's one of the reasons why we have to stay out of this, because this is the infection that can actually happen to the men of God. These are things that are said in the rough and tumble game of politics. We saw it with Donald Trump, and when he got elected, and some of the things that he said, and they seemed outrageous and outlandish, and they were very judgmental, and this is who you are. But I think one of the reasons why we stay away from this being a focus as a leader. Now, do we need Christians in every area of society? Yeah, I definitely want Christian judges and cops, and and I don't have to push them there, because everybody's not going to be a preacher. So the reality is that people grow up and they want to be police officers and they want to be politicians. So we don't have to push them in that area. So I think the idea that, we need to go out and to get people to vote and to change our world indicates that there's a world here that can be changed. And I think that if we're in the book, we're really not designed here as Christians to make this world better. We already recognize it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. So the idea of making sure you vote, I think, is a good thing from a social standpoint. Sure. I'm not sure if that's where our focus is from the pulpit standpoint. That's far from come out from among them and touch not the unclean thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think when the focus becomes on one person or a small group of people, you really run the risk of sort of, okay, so if you're not for him, then you're for somebody else, and you set yourself up in the same way, because nobody's perfect, and eventually, as we see with Biden, you might have issues with him. So I mean,
absolutely,
you can't, as soon as you tie yourself as the church to a politician, you tie yourself to everything that they do and say and stand for. That's problem. That is a problem. I mean, that's a thing.
You tie yourself to the world, right?
Right.
Right. I mean, in some ways, we hitch our wagons to the world. Here's where we need to vote. This is where this is the best place to go. And the truth would be told, Christians don't have an actual biblical obligation to be a part of the political system of the world. The truth be told, we're to go out into the world to preach the gospel, but we don't have an obligation. I think it's great to vote, and I would encourage people to vote. But sure. From the position as a pastor and as a leader in the church, that's not even in my wheelhouse.
Right.
That's not even that's not on the agenda. The agenda is going out into this world and preaching and teaching the gospel. And I think the idea that we get so revved up as if there's a politician out there that will somehow be able to fix it. That's the problem in and of itself. Yeah. That's just going to be that brother 4 years from now will just be disappointed. No matter how many people he get out to vote, he's still going to be disappointed. America's still going to be America 4 years from now with the same problems.
Yeah. So how do you see him different than Martin Luther King Jr.?
You mean the brother who was just speaking?
Yes.
I don't see him very different. Well, you know what? I do see him differently. I think that Dr. King had a particular focus, and I think Dr. King did not do both. I think the reality is that Dr. King made a decision.
Right.
He made a decision that this was the direction that he was going to go in, right? That this was the direction God had called him into. So the idea of Daniels being out there, definitely. But I don't think that there's a way that you can do both. I think that there's a direction of, if you're pastoring and leading God's people, there's a mandate and there's a manual that's already given. If you're going into politics, there's also a manual that's there, that's already given, that's not that's not in that word. Right. And so you got to make that choice and make that decision. And I think Dr. King's position was somewhat different because he had a social agenda. But again, let's look at it. Free at last, for real?
Yeah, not so much.
Not so much.
Not so much. Right. Yeah. More aspirational than reality.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Well, he left. He knew he couldn't do what he did from the pulpit, right?
Right.
But those that stay in the pulpit must do that which is required of the pulpit, which is to teach and to preach the gospel. That's the role of those in the pulpit. If you are not in that pulpit, Ezekiel, go do your thing. God has those. I absolutely know that. But under no circumstances do they go back and forth.
Nah, I agree with you on that. You got to pick a lane and sort of stay within that lane, for sure. Yeah, great point. So, man, we gotta leave it there. This was a great conversation. Totally
absolutely
enjoyed you. Thanks for Sean Fader for calling in and sharing your comments. And we hope that you will join us again next week, 7 o'clock, right here, where we will have another great topic for you. We'll have a thorough discussion. Hope you'll join in and make your feelings and thoughts known.
Look forward to it. Listen, this was great. And listen, everybody who was tuning in, don't hesitate to call us. Don't hesitate to call in, because we want to hear what you have to say. You help us to get past the noise.
Absolutely. All right.
Take care.
Good night, everyone. God bless. All right.